So welcome to this podcast. In this podcast, I'm going to talk about the placement of Mars in Libra. Now, funny, this was requested by somebody a few days ago, and I just thought that I should record it. It was always been on the cards, you understand? It's just that from time to time, I find myself not having enough time to make podcasts anymore, which is good in some sense, because it means I have more work to do, which is good. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about the planet Mars, the functional light of Mars, what it implies. And in summary, it is a vehicle, a capsule of some kind that transfers from one reality to another reality. And that's all. And I also talk about how it is the ability of self-awareness once it emerges into a reality to hold on. And that this holding on process is the primary job of the infant when it is born. It is such a primary motive that it is hard-coded. The infant doesn't know that it is doing it. It just shows up as the will to live, the will to be. Now, where you have Mars in your natal chart is where you are holding on to something. You're holding on to existence. The sign that is producing that Mars is telling you how you are holding on to existence. And the holding on metaphor is just something that I need to use to give an example of a hand that is holding on to something. Do you understand? But what it really is more than that. You are coupled to existence. It's a process of entanglement that initiates once you are born. That is why we study the ascendant, because the ascendant is the instantiation of the neural vortex. At least that is what it is supposed to be. Do you understand? That instantiation it's like a surge in the brain. Because prior to that, the child has been in the womb, and whatever sensory experience that the child has been having has been very muffled. I mean, at some point they start learning to taste, but they don't know what they're tasting. They don't even know what taste is. They don't, and they can't see because the womb is literally, at most it lights up. It's very diffuse in some sense. So the neural vortex is what is being built and assembled in the womb. It is being built from what I call a seed kernel, a three-dimensional. Well, if you have to use the terminology of modern day science, you say it's a cryptographic key of extremely high dimension, a seed kernel, because it is made from your father's DNA in the sex cell and your mother's DNA in her sex cell. The two DNAs, they untangle, they come together, they don't merge. They form a geometric and spatial relationship between themselves. They reorganize themselves into a structure. That structure is a three-dimensional structure, and it's a key. It unlocks you from the lattice. Because prior to that, you are not defined. Once that key is engaged, the key tells your mother's biochemistry how to build you. And it selects for the particular strand or the particular variation of you. Because there's so many. I mean, your father releases millions of sperm. Each one is a variation of himself. Each one is a variation of narrative. But eventually, the egg selects for one. Because some people think that the sperm is the thing that makes its way to the egg. The egg is the one that selects which one that it wants. You understand? If the egg doesn't allow the sperm in, then the sperm won't be able to get in. So the sperm goes to taste the egg. Many of them, they try to rush. They want to taste the egg. And the tasting is an interactive thing. You understand? It's like an exchange of something between egg or the outer membrane of the egg and the sperm. Once there is a connection that matches, like I said, it's a cryptographic key. Once the connection matches, the key unlocks, then the head of the sperm can go in and it begins to unspool its DNA. It will form that matching structure because the two are related. You don't taste something and then say you want to eat it and then when it comes in, you reject it. That's not the way that it works. You taste it, you accept it because that is what the thing that you want. And when it comes in, the mother's DNA system or in her sex cell will arrange itself in a geometric relationship or a spatial relationship with the father's DNA sex, and that will create a structure, like a permanent structure, which I call a seed kernel. And it has a mathematical form. It's made up of prime numbers and their powers. That's really what it is. All right? And everybody has one. Everybody. It's as unique as your fingerprint. Now, once that begins to happen, the job of the seed kernel, the first thing, because it has to build a body, because you never had a body before. So it builds a neural vortex. The neural vortex is the segment of your brain that will make you human, because that's the entire point. I have a video of this thing on my website, on the homepage. And I put it there because I was trying to point people to something. I was trying to say, look, your unfolding is very mathematical. If you don't know, if you have questions, come and ask me. will show you. It's the building of a baby's body in the womb is following a very precise mathematical process. Every decision that is made there is made based on arithmetic, based on counting, based on mathematics and geometry. And the entire point is to be able to make that neural vortex, because that neural vortex in your brain, every human brain contains a neural vortex. It is activated when you are born. That first breath that you take when, the air hits your lungs and everything, it burns an imprint. That is really an instantiation of the neural vortex. And if you want to know what the neural vortex looks like, I have a couple of papers that you can access through my website on Zenodo, where you can get pictures of what this neural vortex looks like. And it's a spiral, a vertical spiral, and it has 6 arms. Now, that same structure is the structure that we find, at least from the organized complexity framework, we find it as the structure that emerges from the singularity of the universe. The universe itself, what you call a Big Bang and all that, it emerged from a singularity that has a cubic crystal form. Cubic, hexagonal. And so when it unfolds phylotactically. And phyllotaxis is the way that certain plants grow in some sense. If you look at certain leaves or certain whatever, they arrange themselves so that they don't be on top of themselves because they need to get light from the sun. So if they block themselves, then some leaves will die. So they tend to want to space themselves out as far away from each other as possible. That is phyllotaxis. And you look at it in a plant, you don't realize that is the way the entire universe unfolds. Okay, so these are not speculations anymore. We have theoretical frameworks and papers that actually demonstrate this thing now. So if you're interested in the details, you go look at the papers. You can access them through my website and then to take you to Zenodo and you can actually read technical papers. It's a beautiful story. That's what I'm trying to say. That neural vortex is the beginning of what we call the ascendant. So it's really very Martian in the way that it starts. That is Mars. You understand? It's the instantiation of it because now a will is active in the world. And that neural vortex, it contains the patterns of all the stories because your life is a story that you are going to tell. And all the experiences and everything, it's interactive. Because people imagine that they're alone in this universe. You're just born into a universe that doesn't care about you, doesn't even know that you exist. It's not true. So if you understand the details of what is going on, you realize that how could you even think like that? It's an interactive process. You're interacting with the universe. There's a presence. Your life story is like a design, like a prescription in some sense. So you are allowed to make your choices, but the choices that you are making, you're within your parameter space. Okay? That parameter space is what we study as a natal chart. And so we do synthesis because we have to unite all aspects of the parameter space into one so that we can try to get an understanding of what it's all about. So I can know yourself better. Okay? But you see, these podcasts, I go through the science in some sense. I know it's not a mainstream science. So if you probably go and Google most of what I'm telling you, you probably find nothing. I have many instances where people ask Grok, like when I'm tweeting on X, I say, is this true? And Grok says, oh no, this is nonsense. That's because it's an LLM. It doesn't know anything. It only knows what it has been trained. But organized complexity is not mainstream yet. In order to be able to use the AI for my research and all that, I have to train them. All right, and that takes a while. So Mars is like a vehicle that allows consciousness to move from one state to another. So every single time that you need to change your awareness, you are initiating the way that your Mars is sitting in your natal chart. All right? And the way that you are initiating that change is the same way that you're holding on to existence because it is your primary mode of being. It's so primary because it's so old. It's the first thing that you did. You don't remember anymore. Because when you grow old enough, Leo kicks in at some point where you now begin to envisage yourself as a primary storyteller. So you begin to lay down your memories according to that primary storytelling. And simply that means that all the memories you laid down prior to a different sense of self, they now become very difficult to access. And that way your brain is not overwhelmed. Your sense of self is not overwhelmed. Because if you had the same access all through, then you'll be able to remember every single minute or every single day of your life. It can be horrific. The adaptation of our brains learn to forget. It's not that the information is no longer there. It's there. But if you remembered all of it, you will not be able to function. And you have to be forward looking. Okay? So some people have that condition where they remember everything. It's a nightmare because if you have unpleasant situations, you will always live with them. Can you imagine what that is? So Mars is how you hold on. And you are holding on in a way that is impulsive because you don't know that you're holding on. And where you have Mars is where you tend to act. Before you even know what is going on, you have reacted in that way. Because it's a very deep programming. It is the first way that you understood yourself. Or the first way that you knew that you were self in some sense. Now, what is Libra? Libra is a different type of condition to the Martian function because Mars is one-dimensional. It's just concerned with that bursting out. That's it. Once that's done, well, it needs something else. Otherwise, it's going to look for something else to burst out of or burst into. Alright, so people who have serial placements in Aries or something like that, they're always jumping in and out of things, they get bored very easily because when you jump into something, or before you jump into something, it seems exciting. But when you jump into it, the only thing you want to do is jump out, okay? That's because that's not what that jumping in is meant for. You are trying to use the jumping in to define meaning. Martian functions don't do that. Meaning is too complicated for it. Its job is just to be able to get you into something, and then something else needs to take over. Now, Libra is a more complex aspect of our personality. It is the part where you begin to project the stories that you have been telling yourself as an internal experience. You now begin to project them towards what looks like an external reality. Above, below. So the lower half of the natal chart is composed of the stories that you're telling yourself internally. It's a kind of monologue in some sense. And yeah, house 1 and 2, Aries and Taurus, they're strict monologues. By the time you get to house 3, it's as if somebody joins you, which is the activation of your mind. You now are presented with a more complex space. The difficulty of navigating a 3-dimensional space is what triggers the activity of your mind. Now, by the time you get to the 4th house and onwards, you are preparing for that descendant experience, that Libra experience. You are preparing for that because that's where you now begin to create the personality that you will now need to project into Libra. So Libra is like a mirror in some sense. And because of the structure of Libra, it's a place where compensation begins. Because it's like a mirror in some sense. If you see yourself as big, then you will try to balance out something that is small. If you see yourself as small, you try to balance out with something that is big. So people might imagine that opposites fare well together, but that's not the way that it works. In relationships, similarities tend to do better. Opposites generate excitement, so even the best similarities are not exactly similar. So you must have something that acts as the spots around which you people can grow. So there must be some type of tension, some type of dissonance. Otherwise you won't grow. But you need the similarities to be more, because the similarities are the things that keep people together. Alright? So the idea of dating someone is to understand the similarity profile. How similar are you to this person? What are the values that you share? Where do you see yourself going forward? And you don't just expect someone to tell you everything about themselves, because they won't. They will present themselves in the best light, because that's Libra. You put your best foot forward. It's like a sales thing in some sense. So you are presenting to someone the development from your 1st house to your 6th house. Think of it as some type of marketing. You are marketing yourself in some way, right? So you want the person to see you in the way that you want the person to see you, not the way that you are. Now, Libra is the theater where eventually everybody brings their best foot forward, and then the games begin. The dance begins, and once somebody steps on your toes while dancing, well, that's not a partner for you, and you move on. The idea is that by the time you are ready to get into Scorpio, you have known someone for long enough, you've been able to assess the similarities and the differences, because Scorpio is where it gets real. You understand? So, what does Mars in Libra now entail? You see, you are holding on. The Mars is holding on to this process of self-reflection, because that's really what it is, because there's really no other. You understand? People just imagine that there's other, but there's none. Let me explain to you why that is. You see, I'm going to use a reference of the Torah because, most people or some people listening, they might be Christians and all that. So the narratives are familiar. It says that when Adam was in paradise, all right, he was uncomfortable. He had everything, but it was uncomfortable. Why? Because something was missing from his reality. He said, look, all the animals, they all come in dualities. Where's my duality? And God says, look, you're not a duality, you are unity. I gave you myself, literally. I'm a unity, so you are a unity. But Adam wasn't satisfied. Why? No internal dialogue. That internal dialogue process is the nature of like a duality. So it is said in the narrative that God put him to sleep, and from there he created a woman and all that. These are anthropomorphications, so don't take it so literal. Do you understand? But what happened is that God was able to give him the experience of a dual self. And what happened? By doing so, you open the reality to duality. So the narrative tells you that the woman went and ate a fruit from a serpent and everything. Nah. That is all anthropomorphic, because what is really happening is that experience, which is an internal dialogue, requires a duality at a minimum. Because when there's only a unity, then what is contrasting? There's nothing to contrast against. Do you understand? And that was Adam's problem. He imagined he could name everything, meaning he knew everything, but he didn't know what he was. And so God telling him what he was not enough. He wanted to experience what he was. Well, once your requirement is the sense of experience, then you need a theater. That's really what it is. You need a theater. And in the theater, since what you really want is experience, then it must be a theater where you can contrast against yourself. And so it is said that Adam left paradise into a world of hardship. But these are anthropomorphications, because what it really is that duality is the cheapest perspective on unity. I'll say that again. Duality is the cheapest perspective on unity. Because after one comes two. Duality is cheaper than triplicity or quadruplicity. Alright? So, the reality that we experience as human beings is a reality where we experience duality. Why? Because we are making reference to ourselves. This is the essence of what is described as Libra. It is the state of consciousness that allows you feel as if there are other things, but there's nothing. You are looking at the extension of yourself and you are telling stories about that extension. And the stories that you're telling, they're not coming from outside, really. They're your stories. The stories that you generated from the 1st to the 6th house. Aries to the sign of Virgo. They're your stories. And then you begin to tell those stories within the realities that contain other people. And then that's where Libra starts. So with Libra, you start with one. I mean, it's a loading system, because by the time you get to Pisces, you're now dealing with everybody. But in Libra, you start with one. And if that one is successful enough, you go into Scorpio. And then the truth in Scorpio, the truth of all the stories from the 1st to the 6th, right? They get tested in Scorpio. Which is why, when you have significant placements in Scorpio, all your life lessons are going to come from emotionally intense relationships. Because that's really what it is. Because the contention in Scorpio is when you take the closest look at yourself in the mirror. The mirror is it looks like another person. So what makes relationships very intense like that is because those people that you are having that intense, they're telling you hard-hitting truths, man, or they're relating with you in ways that cause you pain. Why? Because, most of what they're saying is true. And yet you hurt them back as well. So the hurt is what you call emotional intensity. That's really what it is. And why? Why does it occur? Because in Scorpio, you remember that you are not a dual creature. You remember that you are unity. You're only having a perspective on unity. And the cheapest perspective on unity is duality. So most of the problems associated with Scorpio, they have to do with possessiveness. Why? Because unity means that this is your own. It's not separate from you. It's your own, and you don't want anybody else to touch it, and you don't, it all gets very convoluted. But all the drama is all about that. Because as a human being, before you exist as a physical creature, you are not a duality. It's just that, the condition is that because of that condition, you don't really know anything per se. You don't know what you are. You don't know yourself. So you want to know. So you come into a reality of experience where you can bounce off signals from you, but against what looks like others. And then you can begin to tell yourself stories about others. But really, the stories that you're telling about others, they're just reflections of the stories that you're telling yourself. Do you understand? It's why I don't understand the oppressor-oppressed dynamic, because it doesn't make any sense. The oppressor is in bondage. The oppressed is in bondage. So what is the benefit of the whole damn thing? Do you understand? Scorpios are inundated with an evil inclination, and I'll explain what that means. It's the feeling of envy, because it comes from a survival instinct, the need to be. Like I keep telling people, astrologically, what is born on the ascendant is really Scorpio. Whatever sign you find there, that is what that Scorpio currently looks like. Now, human beings cannot experience Scorpio immediately they're born. Why? Because your sexual organs are not mature yet. You're not ready to start telling sexual stories. But guess what? The reason why you are born is so that you can begin to tell those sexual stories. So your formative years are the years that bootstrap you. It's like a computer. You start up so that you can now start telling your sexual story. So most of your life patterns, they really revolve around the narratives that are woven right into sexuality. And remember, in the framework that we're using, it's not really sexuality. It is your relationship with your awareness of unity. And so for every Scorpio person, you want to know what is really going on. That's what drives you. Because what you really want to know is the nature of that unity. Well, Libra is what prepares you for that. And when your Mars is in Libra, that's what the destination really is. Because Mars is that kind of holding on process. But why? Mars is holding on for survival. Do you understand? So in its way, in order to prepare itself for that Scorpio, it wants to balance out things before it can go into Scorpio. So it is concerned with examining the other. Constantly. It is constantly trying to realign itself relative to the other, or whatever it considers to be other. Now, the mistake that happens is when it begins to believe that the other is somehow separate and independent. This is an issue that can come up because it's Mars. Do you understand? Success really begins to come when the Martian function realizes that, wait a second, this orientation that I'm having with the other, there's really no other. All I'm looking at are my motives. So the question is, why do I need this orientation? Why is this orientation pleasing to me and this other one not pleasing to me? Because initially the Mars in Libra person starts out by trying to have an orientation to everything and everyone. So people tend to look at them as people pleasers. But that's not what is really going on. They are calibrating their experience. The idea of trying to satisfy everybody is so that you don't make mistakes, so that you leave everything in play because you're afraid to choose. But choose you must, because Libra is just a theater where you dance. Nothing really happens in the dancing theater. If you dance well with somebody well, you got to take them home or they got to take you home. That's the business end of the whole thing. All right. And when you get there in that business end, all the truth of the dance will show. If you were just faking it, well, it will show. If you were actually a very good dancer, well, it will also be apparent. So the Mars and Libra person hesitates to choose because usually there are statements written in Scorpio or in the 8th house or regarding Pluto, which now gives them that apprehension. So they'd rather keep everybody in play. They don't want to close the door to anything, but that's not the way Scorpio works. If you must go into Scorpio, then you have to take one person in and close the door to everybody else. Otherwise, you're going to freak out. And when you freak out, when Scorpio freaks out, they start compensating. You understand? The most manipulative, the most intense types of emotional dramas, they all take place in Scorpio for a reason. Because it's very serious. Those you take in there, they can make you or they can harm you. Alright? So Mars in Libra is a statement regarding that. And usually what happens is that by the time you find a one-dimensional functional like Mars in a 7-dimensional experience like Libra, then you realize that, well, the challenge here is you must learn to choose. So what do you need to know in order to be able to choose? Well, the rationale is that you have to understand that what is there to choose? There's only one thing having an experience, and that is you. Do you understand? Mars has this very typical behavior. The reason why it is impulsive is because once it comes into existence, the only thing that it is afraid of is non-existence. So Mars rushes for Venus. Mars is the physical side of sex because of that. It rushes for pleasure because pleasure is what tells you that you are alive. Alright? The sensation. It's very important because these transactions happen when you're very little, as you're suckling. The taste of that suckle, the taste of the milk, it calibrates your brain, all right? It's part of the thing that makes you want to live. So it is very important that a Mars and Libra person, they really get down to the business of recognizing that the Mars and Libra really has a destination, and that is Scorpio. So you are there to flirt in some sense, because it's hard to keep a Mars and Libra person away from being flirtatious. How is it possible? If you make that type of demand on them, then you are basically stifling the Martian urge. They have to sample because they need to choose. You understand? And they're aware of the fact that their choices can range into superfluousness. And they're afraid of that because usually that is the first sign of being able to make a mistake. So in the natal chart, you should look at your 6th house or in the sign of Virgo. That's where Libra is patterned first. Libra shows up in Virgo as a plan. That plan is what is going to be activated in Libra. And this is the reason why we do synthesis, because you can't just look at a house and then say, okay, because this is in this, then that is what is going on. That's not the way that it works. Evolution is a real thing. Things prepare for what they are supposed to do. They don't just ignite. I was talking to someone yesterday and I said, look, you realize that your seed kernel is a cryptographic key of the highest possible order. Most of the online financial transactions in the world, they are secured cryptographically with prime numbers. Well, what makes you think you are different? That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you here. You're a seed kernel. That seed kernel is a combination of prime numbers with exponents attached to them. All right? It's a huge number. Now, that seed kernel, it is programmed in such a way that as it unfolds and builds a neural vortex that begins to have these different types of life stories, because these are social stories, right? It's a processing in the mind. That processing is not, it's a computational thing. It's meaning it is amazing. It's very varied, very wide, but it's also very amazing and it's taking place on many levels. Knowing yourself means that there are certain experiences that unlock certain aspects of your consciousness. And most people don't know that. They tend to want to avoid difficult situations all the time, but you're doing yourself a disservice because you need to understand that you are in something that has a beginning and an end prescribed. Do you understand? It's like you're trying to drive to a destination. There's more than one way to get there, but what you're looking for is the best possible way, right? So that's why you have to choose. But all the ways are the potentials that exist in your parameter space so that you can choose. But even though you are choosing, you are still in your parameter space. All right? Now, as you're driving to your destination, wherever it is, looking for the best way to get to somewhere, you are looking at the signs on the road. You know, you don't want to go take the wrong direction or whatever. So you are looking for things that help you to understand your journey. And those things, they work by unlocking various aspects of your psyche. And some of them are very painful experiences. Pain is always an indication that you are growing. It's not an indication that something is wrong per se. Especially emotional pain. It indicates that you are growing. Because growth cannot be a simple experience. It must be something that is initially unfamiliar. So when it is time to grow, usually it starts with a crisis. All right? The idea is not to have a knockout punch as a crisis, but a crisis that can stimulate other parts of your reality resources to come into being so that you can grow. Now, this is very important because the Mars and Libra person, they don't really want to go outside of that Libra. They don't want things to get too serious. When things begin to get too serious, it means that they must now make a choice. But what if they choose the wrong one? They are very aware of the implications. So some of them may run, or they may want to keep things on a very superficial level. All right? So that's really what it is. Mars in the 7th house also indicates that the motive while you are born in the world, the seed kernel that you're carrying and the neural vortex that it has emerged, the motive of it requires that you play in the reality that you share with other people. So you can't exactly go and lock yourself up behind closed doors and say, no, you're not going to talk to anyone. No, your motive needs to play out within a theater where other people are concerned. That way, you can calibrate your own perception of your own self. Okay? Because in Mars in Libra, you will meet Venus, because Venus rules Libra as the social side of Taurus in that sense, the social side of pleasure. Which is why I told you that a Mars in Libra person is a natural flirt. But it's not a flirtation that is really deep. By the time flirtations begin to get deep, this Mars in Libra person is most likely to disappear. They want everything on a casual level. Why? Because you don't have to choose. Choosing is where you have to pay your debts. And, you can constantly keep borrowing once you have Mars and Libra because you don't want to choose. But if you do that, you won't grow. You won't grow up. And what that looks like is a person who, after quite some time, is not settled down, not married, nobody in your life. Rather, you have a lot of acquaintances and social networks, but nobody really knows who you are because you haven't shared yourself with anybody because you're afraid to get hurt. Without realizing that getting hurt is one of the primary reasons why you are here. The experience allows you to calibrate what it means to be self-reflective. Do you understand? It is the reason why you decided on duality in the first place. It's to bounce off a sense of self against something. But what it really is against yourself. But obviously, you must have participants in this game. And so there's everybody else. And everybody has a perspective where they're looking at a reality that contains everybody else. You think it's a coincidence? There's a name for that type of system because it's a network system of some kind where everyone is a vantage point on everything. So it feels as if there's no preferred direction in anything. It appears very Gaussian. But the reality of the matter is that human beings form preferential attachments. And the beginning of that process starts in Libra. Because Libra is the screen that receives your convictions in that sense. So convictions are things that are based on truth and evidence, things that you no longer question. Like I've said in some earlier podcasts, talked about how mother is a facilitation process in the acceptance of self, which is what conviction is. So Libra begins to show you how well you have accepted yourself. Because Libra is the screen where your ambitions begin to play out in a reality that you share with other people. Now, before you begin to share that reality, there is a preparation in Virgo because you must have a tangible plan. Because when you meet someone, it's a window into their reality. They are also having a window into your reality. So these realities, they negotiate with each other. You understand? And they negotiate in ways that you don't have to get the full picture. You just need to make a good impression. And a good impression is an impression that says if you're interested in someone, then the person is likely more interested in you back as well. Because there seems to be some similarity that can be found. So Mars in Libra is someone who really develops the kind of skill that allows them to present themselves to different types of realities. You understand? They're not really in any one of them. They are like tasters or samplers in some sense. So they're constantly in and out of it. All right? The idea is to have deeper meaning behind it eventually, but that needs to be done by something else in the natal chart. Otherwise, the person becomes very superficial. It's just jumping from one fleeting situation to another. All right, without really planting any solid roots down. So that's really what it is. Almost all Mars and Libra people are natural flirts, and they are not averse to having casual sexual relationships. If you're in a relationship with them and you tell them that they have to stop flirting or it won't work. That's like asking a flower not to open up to a bee. The flower wants to be pollinated, so it's best to be realistic with these things. their realities involve sampling so many other realities. And when Mars is in Libra, you're drawn with the impulsiveness of that Mars. There's a root motive of yours that is in that Libran space that you need to pursue. So it is very important that people with Mars in Libra become very honest about their motivations. Otherwise, you're going to hurt people. All right? And you don't want to do that, because Libra is also the beginning of where the building of reputation starts. Because, the journey towards becoming somebody in Capricorn or in the 10th house, it starts from Libra. So you want to have those good first impressions and good relationships, and you want to be able to identify the right similarities to take into Scorpio, because the aim of every Scorpio is to find true love. And simply what that means is that to be able to reconcile with unity in a way that is fulfilling so that you can grow. All right. That's really what it is. So that as a human being, you have regular access to the reality of truth. And the truth is that you're not a dual creature. You see, the penis is never really separate from the vagina. They're always together. Always. When we take a perspective on unity, which is a duality, which is the cheapest perspective on unity, we see the penis and the vagina as if they are different things. And yet they are locked into an irresistible urge to merge. Why do you think that is the case? What do you think you feel when you find this strong urge to just have sex with someone or to be with someone? What do you think you're feeling? You're feeling the power of unity. And that's because that person that you're having, that they contain something about the question you're asking about your own unity. And so they contain an answer in some sense. And so you're drawn to them. And you think that it's all about sex. The sex is not really a thing in existence. It's just the experience of unity. So duality is a sensory experience. That is why Taurus is a second house, is the second sign. You understand? Very interesting thing. And there's a reason why Taurus sits opposite Scorpio. Because those sensory experiences, they get maximally amplified in Scorpio. Because that's what sex is, isn't it? The orgasm is an explosion of your sensory capacity. Alright? So, but it's not really about sex. It's about unity. It's about the reconciliation of everything into oneness, which is what pushes Scorpio to continue evolving into Pisces. Because in Pisces is where that is really achieved. So it's not just a union between you and someone else. It's a union between you and the rest of the cosmos. And that is exactly why you are here. That's really what it is.